Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. So glad you guys could join us once again. For those tuning in on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and on X, we're glad that you all can be with us. I'm going to go ahead and connect with our friends over on Instagram so they can be a part of our conversation for today. And last but certainly not least, going to connect with our friends over on Amazon. And that is where you can get the book by our next guest. I'm very excited about this. This is an exciting topic, I think, for all of us. And it goes to not only, of course, the importance of the conversations around money, but also the different views about money, especially when it comes to talking about Blacks and capitalism. And we're now live on Amazon Live with Cyrus Webb Presents. If you guys are new to us on the Amazon platform, welcome. Make sure you guys do hit that follow button. You see it here in this corner or down below. You also will see the book by our next guest. So excited to welcome Dr. Rachel Laryea to our broadcast today. Rachel is celebrating the release of this book, Black Capitalists. You guys can see it here in print as well as a Kindle edition. I want to talk to Rachel not only about the writing of the book, but also what it's been like for her to see the conversations happening about it and what she hopes you as readers are able to take away from it as well. Thank you so much for the time, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Cyrus. It's a pleasure.
Well, the pleasure's definitely all mine. First of all, I want to say congratulations. On the buzz. I've been seeing people all over the place talking about this book. I know Angela Yee was singing its praises on her Instagram as well. What has it been like for you to see the way that people are responding to the book and the conversations that you've been able to start?
That's been part of and one of the most interesting things because, when you see a title like Black Capitalists, if there were ever a book to not judge by its title, it's this one,
Yeah.
because the title itself is very provocative. For some people, it even evokes very visceral reactions
Hmm.
because we have very kind of complicated relationships to the economic system and complicated relationships to money and how we
Yeah.
think about race and money. And so it's been interesting to see kind of the diversity of reactions to it, but it's also just been a blessing to see how people, by and large, have really gravitated towards it because I think this is a really important conversation that we need to be having, but more than just a conversation, kind of unified action that should come out of this kind of conversation for all of us in this moment.
And Rachel, you bring up a really good point. I think when was telling some friends of mine about your coming on the show, and I was even when I was reading the book, I was telling people about it, and I could tell by the response. And I found this interesting myself that just hearing the word capitalist or capitalism, right? For some people, they have this own idea. You begin the book talking about the definition, but have you found that that's been part of the reaction for some is how they view capitalism?
Yeah, so the core of the challenge or the kind of visceral reaction that some people might have, I think, is the pairing of Black and capitalists. When you put that together, then there's questions around what are you intimating or suggesting about Black people's relationship to capitalism,
Mhm.
especially because when you consider the history of American capitalism, really built on exploitation of Black people,
Mhm.
extraction, where Black people have been the commodity and the labor source, but have never been the beneficiary of kind of their labor. It creates this kind of oxymoron for folks, or even a sense of
Right.
identity crisis, because how can you be a Black person and adopt an economic system whereby you've never been the beneficiary of it and you've never been entitled to what you are owed? And I think that's really the core of the tension. And for someone like myself, who I did my doctoral studies at Yale University in anthropology and Black studies. And so I was very much trained in racial capitalism, the Black radical tradition, and all of the critiques of capitalism. But at the same time, for me, it's really important that we hold in tension all of the contradictions that we live in. America itself is a contradiction, and we navigate that every day. And so we also have to sit and reckon with the fact that today we have more Black millionaires than we've ever had in this country before.
Yeah.
And yet the racial wealth gap persists. And there's the kind of strategic dismantling of equity and diversity, equity, inclusion that we see in front of us. And yet we are still pursuing financial economic liberation. So, how
Yeah.
do we hold all these contradictory things together and make space for ourselves as we ever strive to create a system that's more just and equitable for us all? And so, while I always will make room for the tensions and the kind of problematics that people will point to, for me, so much of my call to action is around how do we reconcile all of that and still create new economic outcomes for ourselves and our communities?
I love the way you phrase that, Rachel, because one of the things I took away from it as a reader was that that to me is part of the design to have us be divided about how we see capitalism and capitalists. Because if we see it as something that is negative, or has a negative connotation, it's something we will not strive to understand and be a part of, right? And that leads me to you because I did not know anything about your life before this book was pitched to me. But one thing that surprised me, Rachel, is when I was, of course, reading about the conversations you were having, was how much of yourself was in this and your own grappling with what you were hearing and experiencing. Did you go into the book knowing that you would be one of the main characters of it?
I had no idea. And it's funny because the book is really kind of the final draft, if you will, of my doctoral dissertation, which I started almost 10 years ago.
Okay.
And at that time, it was very kind of written for an academic audience. My own kind of story was not in that, outside of the fact of kind of naming my own kind of subjectivity as the narrator of this story. But my own personal experiences didn't really feature into it. But, as I, worked with my editor and my publishing team, I realized, and there's conversation around like, what's going to be compelling is creating a through line of my own story. And as you put it, my own evolution and kind of thinking about capitalism, how I participate in it through the different kind of hats that I wear. And so I kind of learned the value and importance of anchoring kind of this story against my own story as a way to help readers kind of understand how this can really kind of materialize in your everyday experience and create some sense of relatability and accessibility. Because I think we talk about capitalism, it can be this like really heady theory. It's hard to kind of
Mhm.
grapple with and understand and really kind of have some materiality around it. But I think when it's anchored in stories that are relatable and we can put ourselves in the story, then we kind of bring it down a couple notches and we can better understand it and kind of grasp it.
And I should, to that point, I did not mention it, Rachel, but I should mention the subtitle of the book. The book is called Black Capitalists, but the subtitle is A Blueprint for What is Possible. And I think that positive note comes from two places. And again, I'm speaking just as the reader, and I'm curious as to your thoughts as the author. One is education, right? And two is appreciating what is available. I think a lot of times, if you don't educate yourself or know what is possible, what is available, you definitely can't be a part of the conversation and benefit from it, right? How much of that went into what you hope readers take away from this conversation, Rachel, about not only better understanding their relationship and ideas around money and and influence and wealth, but also how that knowledge in itself could be power moving forward?
Yeah, and I'll tell a story to kind of speak to your question.
Okay.
When I was in grad school and was endeavoring to kind of pursue this course of study, 2 years into my program, I was responsible for kind of sharing a prospectus to my peers, faculty, and staff at the department. And, I go up on stage, I say I'm going to do this study really focused on how Black people are using the tools of capitalism in new and really kind of radical ways, if you will. And at the end of my presentation, one of my Black colleagues, she raises her hand and she says, Black capitalists don't exist. At
Mm.
best, they can be financiers, but they can't be capitalists. And it was in that very moment that I really kind of crystallized my resolve to write this book and see it through. Because in a place like Yale University, one of the most premier institutions, academic institutions in the world, not just in the country, there was a limitation that I saw placed on what Black life can be. And so much of the critique and why my colleague was saying this was, because of the history of Black people's relationship to capitalism. But it was a very kind of singular and reductive narrative nonetheless, and didn't kind of do justice or acknowledge the fact that there are other realities that we have to account for. And so when you talk about knowledge and educating oneself, I think that's so crucial for this story because it's really an intervention in how we think and really an opportunity to kind of shift our mental paradigm about what is possible for ourselves, what economic thriving can look like, but really how we can relate to capitalism in new ways that are going to get us towards something that's just a little bit more just, a little bit more equitable for us. And so I think part of the call to action is to really challenge ourselves in our beliefs, because that's going to dictate the behaviors that we then kind of pursue in relation to the economic system in front of us. And so beliefs open the aperture for how we think and then ultimately behave as well.
Love that. Such a great point, Rachel. And I think it's something great. Thorn 7915, hello to you over there on Instagram. I see you guys over there on YouTube as well. Appreciate the hearts. If you guys have any questions or comments, make sure you guys put those in the chat, as well as those tuning in on Amazon. I want to say, for those who are just tuning in, welcome. You all are watching Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Rachel Laryea to our broadcast today. She's celebrating the release of her book, Black Capitalists. You guys can see it here. Again, the subtitle of the book is A Blueprint for What is Possible. Let me tell you what I did not expect to find, Rachel, in this book. A reference to O.J. Simpson. You know, I actually marked this because I wanted to read what you said, because, of course, we all have heard, most people, I should say, maybe not all, most people have heard the quote from OJ, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." And I love the reference that you put this in this conversation, and it ties in so well with what we're talking about. For those who have the hardcover, it's on page 111. But this is what you wrote. But what does Simpson have to do with black capitalists? As it turns out, a lot. The more people I talked with, read about, or watched on television and film, the more aware I became of desires for self-determination that are divorced from one's racial identity. But certainly not all black capitalists, cultural icons, or fictional characters I studied see benefit in disavowing their racial identity. Many proudly identify as black and credit their racial identity for the way they navigate and make meaning of the world. I don't adjudicate a person's choice. What matters is why and how those choices are made and their impact on the spaces black capitalists occupy. So I want to talk to you about what it was like for you to reflect on that, that quote from OJ, and this conversation about black capitalists, and what is true for people even that I know, Rachel, who don't like, they may consider themselves being being someone who participates in capitalism, but may not see themselves as a black capitalist. What was it like for you to have those type of conversations and see that?
Yeah, well, to speak to OJ, I think what was so interesting to me about even watching, documentaries about his story and learning about his story, and even that kind of quote, "I'm not black, I'm OJ," especially in conversation, as I put it in the book, with Jay-Z and what he was kind of critiquing and responding to in the case of OJ, is that there was resonance with what he was saying with what corporate professionals, black professionals that I was interviewing and speaking with. It's not that they were not wanting to identify as black. They didn't want the racism that was attached to their black identity. And for so many people who work in corporate spaces, the desire is to just be judged on account of your work product. But it's never that simple. It's not just your work product, it's how you show up, it's how you perform, it's how you, especially for Black women, kind of make other people feel disarmed, feel comfortable. So you don't have this kind of stereotype of the angry Black woman kind of associated with you. So there are all of these trade-offs and all of this kind of navigating that we constantly have to do. And that is exhausting. And that's kind of the emotional labor that's certainly uncompensated, but becomes so much a part of our story. And so it was interesting for me to kind of track the parallels, but also be clear about the distinctions when we talk about what is the cost and what are some of the trade-offs to be Black and to thrive and be wealthy. And how is, a kind of Black wealth kind of perception, depiction, even received by society as well, because it's not always received well in different kind of contexts. And so that was really important for me to lay out. And tell me again, what was your second question?
Yeah, and what was it like for you to see that connect? Well, basically, what you were just answering there, Rachel. That that there are some people who that is part of the issue. Capitalism is something they don't mind exploring, but to have it segmented out to Black capitalism is something that it seems like they may want to shy away from.
Yeah. And so this is where I think definitions become really important, because again, you look at a title like Black Capitalist, people make assumptions about what that might mean. And so, as you kind of alluded to in the book, I lay out very clearly capitalism is really an economic system focused on private ownership and profitability. And as we know and experience capitalism today, it's all about kind of nurturing individualism, a scarcity mindset, exploitation, extraction. And it's really kind of underpinned by its violent and racist kind of foundations. But for me, to be a Black capitalist is really about identifying as a Black person who repositions themselves within the economic system in order to create social good. So that expression of capitalism is not just about profitability, because again, we're still in the context of a capitalist economy,
Right.
but, and the really important part is around endeavoring to create new opportunities and new systems centered on social good. And so, what Black capitalism really does is nurtures communal mindset, a kind of communal orientation. It nurtures an abundance mindset and really aims to really kind of not reproduce the harms of capitalism today. So it's not about extraction, exploitation, etc. And so that becomes a way in which we can combat the system that we live in today while still operating within it.
Yeah. Such a great conversation, Rachel. I'm so glad you wrote this book. So glad. Well, I want to ask you this question. I want to say hello to you, Jesus Black Man, over there on YouTube. Appreciate you. Appreciate the kind words. And also go to Bolin. Hello to you over there on IG as well. Where, when as the book was about to be released, did you have any anxiety about how some people might perceive it without reading it, I should say?
1,000%. And what's so interesting is even before I did my first kickoff event for the book launch, one of the book, the Black owned bookstores that was kind of helping host the event, they were receiving some really intense comments from people on Instagram who had yet not even read the
Read
book.
the book.
But again, they read the title and
Yeah.
had all of these presuppositions about what the book was about and what I could potentially be arguing. And again, I think for good reason, we have all these kind of visceral emotional responses to the idea of Blackness being coupled with capitalism and capitalists. And so I think the moment we can take to just take a second and really think about what all this story can mean, and also how it can account for the critiques that many of us have around capitalism, but still give us a way forward as we kind of deal with this interim space that we're in, again, as we're ever striving for a more equitable and more liberatory kind of economic system and future for all of us.
I'm so excited we had a chance to have this conversation. Again, everyone, Dr. Rachel Laryea has been our guest. The book is called Black Capitalists. The subtitle is A Blueprint for What is Possible. Here on Amazon, you guys can get it either in print or you can be able to get the Kindle edition there. I'm going to highlight it for you guys in the carousel there on Amazon. And for those of you who are joining us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, you'll find a link that'll bring you guys over to Amazon to get it. For those joining us on X, we'll put it in the comments section. Those joining us on IG, we'll have it in our stories. Rachel, thank you again for stopping by. How can our audience stay connected with you?
Yes, and thank you for that question. Folks can definitely join my newsletter. It's called the Black Capitalist Newsletter. That's a great way to kind of stay up to date on events, different things that are happening. I've got a couple of book tour events coming up, so that's a great way to stay plugged in, as well as my website, rachellaryea.com, for all the latest in the work that I'm doing, not just with the book, but other entrepreneurial pursuits as well.
Love it. Well, looking forward to our next chat together. Glad to have you on.
Thank you so much, Cyrus.
More than welcome. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, you all make it a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.